Good morning, everybody. It's my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce the first three speakers this morning. And I'm going to read this so I get the words absolutely correct. This is Urbanism of the Past, Scholarship on the History of Architecture in the Built Environment, planned according to spiritual motivations and principles. And in that spirit, I wore this tie. All right. Yes. Spirituality of the past. So we have three speakers, but our third speaker will be coming in at about 10 o'clock, so won't be able to be a part of this session. So we're going to bump her to the next session, and we're going to bring Steve Padgett up into mine. So we'll still have three for this particular session. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Yua Zhan from China, and her presentation this morning is going to be entitled Culture, Fear, Liberty, Fear, and the City of Sensations, Sir William Chambers' dissertation on Oriental gardening, and Burke's sublime effect. Yua is currently a fellow of URPP, Asia and Europe, with Edinburgh University. She was trained as an architect and now is focusing on history of Chinese architecture with a specialty in gardens. So I'd like to introduce her. Thank you.
Thanks. Yep.
This is forward.
Yep.
That's reverse. And there's your pointer.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Billy, for the introduction. And good morning, everyone. So the title of my talk presentation today is Liberty, Fear, and City of Sensations. In this talk, I examine landscape scenes of liberty and fear as described by Sir William Chambers in his dissertation on Oriental gardening, and I analyze them in relation to Edmund Burke's theory of the beautiful and sublime. I argue that Chambers' depiction of these landscape scenes was motivated by a commitment to the importance of cultivating the sentiment of fear in liberal commercial societies, as the dissertation puts forward the role of the sublime scenes for constraining limitless human will in coexistence with the landscape of liberty. A vehicle for the Burkean sublime effect, Chambers' City of Sensations was an educational site contributing to social harmony and maintaining religious sentiment. The dissertation provides an important example of how the Burkean sublime, within frameworks of spirituality and well-being, shaped discourses on city and landscape planning in the second half of the 18th century. Sir William Chambers, in his dissertation on Oriental gardening, envisioned scenes of the pleasing, the terrible, and surprising as the methods of Chinese gardening. The seemingly fictitious descriptions, however, as Elaine Harris has convincingly shown, consist of a theory of Chambers his own. Underneath the Chinese disguise, the sensational scenes resonated strongly with the effect of the sublime and beautiful described by Burke in his philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of sublime and beautiful, which Chambers had carefully studied. Based on John Locke's idea of sensations as a foundation of human nature, Burke traced the sublime and the beautiful to fundamental emotions such as pity, fear, pride, and sympathy. Burke's anatomy of aesthetic sentiment is associated with his exploration of the classical question of how tragedy pleases, and is aimed to have consequences for the effective, moral, and religious life of the city, or to enhance providential sociability. Underpinning Burke's inquiry is natural law philosophy of Cicero and Thomas Aquinas, which essentially maintains that God rules existence through an eternal, universal, natural law, always binding on all people everywhere. In the favorable climate of Scottish Enlightenment, natural law came to be associated with the principle of human emotions and influenced scholars such as David Hume and physician William Cullen's inquiries in the fields of psychology, physiology, as well as morality and politics. With a similar approach, many 18th century architects and theoreticians understood architecture as a moral psychological instrument, affecting one's mind by impressing on the senses. It's with the same approach that Chambers writes a dissertation and thinks of landscape gardening. He makes it plain in the preface to the dissertation, quote, "Gardening's dominion is general, its effects upon the human mind certain and invariable," end quote. So in this here paper, I shall argue the dissertation proposes a system of sensational landscaping, exciting opposite sensations in passengers' minds. Chambers' Chinese gardening is a vehicle for Burke's sublime and the beautiful. In Chambers' vision of, quote, "the whole kingdom as a Chinese garden, where nature appears predominant," it indicated his landscaping theory that British cities and the countryside should become large-scale sites where balanced emotions are formed as if by providence. Where the pleasing scenes induce pleasures, the liberty of the imagination in civil society, the scenes of the terrible and the surprising provoke fear, astonishment, and reverence, so as to maintain the citizens' religious sentiment and combine mental and physical well-being. In the preface, the Chinese gardens are contrasted to the English style of gardens, typically represented in Capability Brown's naturalistic gardening. The Brownian style of gardening, as Chambers criticizes, is not only monotonous and insipid, but also, as an act of liberty, it laid waste the growth of several ages. Chambers' image of the Brownian garden as an axe referred to the criticism of Brown's gardening often removing whole villages to achieve an aesthetic view for the landed class. This image also engaged the discourse of the liberty of the imagination that is associated with these large landscape estates in the 18th century. Joseph Addison in Spectator had famously exclaimed that the pleasure one enjoys at the English landscape farm is the freedom of sight, which makes immaterial contact with unbounded views and feels a delightful stillness and amazement in the soul. The admiration of the Addisonian sublime, as Richard Bogg discussed, is not only admiration of the greatness of nature, but is also a delight in the limitless liberty or expansiveness of the imagination or the mind. Now, this unbounded imagination, at Chambers' characterization, is a terrifying vision of an axe, an image of the unlimited human will, or what Stephen White called false sublime. On this liberty and axe image, Chambers shows his alignment with Scottish Enlightenment thinkers such as David Hume. For Hume, liberty of the imagination is considered as the mind's innate and vigorous capacity for creating associative chains of images and ideas, as well as the dangers of its excess, the moral need to constrain such excess, and the opposition between liberty and the power of such constraint. Burke's inquiry clearly shares the same position. Beauty, Burke holds, is some quality in bodies acting mechanically upon the human mind by the intervention of the senses. In contrast, the sublime constrains or suspends this mental activity of associations. As Burke writes, the passion caused by the great and sublime in nature, where those causes operate most powerfully, is astonishment. And astonishment is that state of the soul in which all its motions are suspended with some degree of horror. In this case, the mind is so entirely filled with its object that it cannot entertain any other, or by consequence, reason on that object which employs it. Here, Burke describes the paralysis of the rational capacity by fear as an exemplary reaction to the sublime. The sublime for Burke is a question not of the subject's increasing self-awareness, but of the subject's sense of limitation and of the ultimate value of that experience within a social and ethical context. Whereas the Addisonian sublime empowers the human will to embrace limitlessness itself, the Burkean sublime encourages a sense of human limitation in the face of divine mystery. In Burke's analysis of the beautiful and sublime, the psychological powers of pleasure and pain, relaxation and contraction connect with the discourse of liberty and constraint in morality and society. In 18th century Britain, along with the undermining of traditional Christianity, there was an increasingly powerful revolutionary discourse of natural liberty. Against the popular revolutionaries' argument, Burke's idea of liberty is not a license to act from sheer self-will. For Burke, liberty derives from natural law. Liberty is that state of things in which liberty is secured by the equality of restraint. Liberty must comport with moral order. He warned, liberty is the greatest of all evils, for its folly, vice, and madness, without tuition and restraint. To be fit for freedom, people need self-control and morality. Quote, men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their own appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere. An advisor to George III and affiliated to the so-called Tory establishment, Sir William Chambers was deeply aware of the moral political crisis mobilized by the radical Whig print culture and the city riots, of which he was also a victim. Just as Burke exclaimed that liberty without wisdom and virtue is great evil, Chambers also aired his anti-radical Whig's views. Liberty, which has so many advantages, attended with some inconveniences of a very serious nature, amongst which the ferocity of its lowest votaries is none of the least formidable. The rigors of emperor are less frightful to me than the frolics of savage mob, elevated to madness with songs of freedom and tons of strong beer. It's easier to please a man with one good head than a monster with 10,000 or bad ones. The remedy to unbounded liberty, as Burke indicated in Inquiry, laid in the training of one's sensibilities. As Burke recognized, while its objects of the beautiful, with the associations of pleasure, love, and sympathy, can strengthen human bonds and enhance sociability, objects of the sublime, by evoking fear, can constrain the expansive imagination and maintain a balanced, healthful bodily and mental being. Following Burke's theory of sublime and beautiful, Chambers sought a landscape gardening that is capable of cultivating tempered imaginations and sensibilities. The opposition of the sentiments of pleasure and fear, corresponding to the Burkean beautiful and sublime, are clearly shown in Chambers' dissertation. Thinly disguised in the Chinese mask, the scenes of the pleasing, the terrible, and the surprising are at once a miniature of the 18th century British social life of liberty and its proposed antidotes of moral constraints. here is an example of the many scenes of the pleasing that is described in Chambers' dissertation. This is a menagerie of the Kew Gardens, which was designed by Chambers. So along with other scenes, here it displays the pride of the British upper and the middle classes in landscape improvement, technological developments, and colonial and commercial expansion. In another example, Chambers described an interesting scene which he disguised again in the Chinese mask. As he describes, the ships arrive at the port, the shops are opened, and the goods are offered to sale. The shopkeepers seize the passengers to purchase their merchandise, and every liberty is permitted. There's no distinction of persons, even the emperor is confounded in the crowd. Quarrels happen, battles ensue, the watch seizes upon the combatants. They are conveyed before the judge, who examines the dispute and condemns the culprit, who is sometimes very severely bastinadoed, to divert his imperial majesty and the ladies of his train. Well, these above fictional quarrels and battles may be seen as an allegory of the recent riots in British colonies and British streets. For example, protests associated with Stamp Act in 1765 and the Freeport Act in 1766. The Chinese corporeal punishment of bastinado may be seen as a judicial constraint on English liberty stretched to its full extent. But the physical pain from bastinado could also be read as anticipating the mental constraints of the sublime effect that the traveler through the Chinese gardens is soon to experience. As we are shown in the dissertation, trees torn into pieces by the violence of tempests, buildings ruined or swept away by the fury of the waters, wolves and tigers howling in the forests, gibbets, crosses, and apparatus of torture seen from the roads. These scenes, however fictitious they may sound like, testified Chambers' employment of the Burke's sublime effect. They did not result in a picture of the mind as oppressed by fear, but rather as terror in distance, which could bring delight. Physiologically, these scenes of the terrible gave the nerves powerful stimuli to regulate the release and the contraction of the fibers of the organism, and they kept the organism in a state of well-being. Emotionally and morally, the tragic scenes appearing to be providentially orchestrated evoked humbling religious responses such as sympathy, astonishment, admiration, and reverence. As Burke demonstrated, the capacity to delight in misfortune consolidated the impulse of sympathy in human beings, thereby fulfilling a larger providential purpose. On the other hand, the incredible darkness, volcano, subterranean tombs on oriental dragons represented the violent, powerful, and irresistible force which could suspend rational scrutiny, putting moral restraints on the hubris, licentiousness, and anarchy produced by the liberal, commercial, and civil society. Chambers, in the dissertation, proposed the landscaping system of sensations applied to the land of the whole country. Well, this image was shown earlier. It's a scene in Kew Gardens. So not only, Chambers' theory is not only limited in the design or plan of landscape park, but in fact, it should be, as he proposed, should be applied to the whole city and the countryside. As he asserts, by this means of landscape gardening, the whole kingdom might soon become one magnificent, vast garden. He emphasizes that the Chinese gardening, with its variety which can excite opposite sensations, should be referred to in the construction of British cities. In or near great cities, where property is much divided, on flats where nature has no play, in all tame situations, the richer and more artificial manner of our gardening is preferable, because it may contain much variety in a small compass, and corrects the natural defects of the ground more speedily, more effectually, with less charge than any other. Chambers' landscape of sensations, or what he called Chinese natural gardening, as Nicholas Pafsner rightly observes, was to be used for planning of complex aesthetic effects on the base of existing elements. We may further note that nature, in Chambers' landscape theory, may be identified with Burke's idea of natural law, the divine and the moral order corresponding to balanced human sensibilities. Thus, Chambers' praise of Chinese cities appearing like nature through landscaping indicates the moral core of his landscape theory. Thanks. That is, the British urban environment should endeavor to achieve the effect of orchestrating the basic elements of human nature, pleasure, fear, and reverence, into balance as it's formed by providence. As Chambers imagined, sensational transportation networks where roads, canals, bridges, and plantations through Britain connected scenes of the pleasing and the sublime, so as to excite opposite passions in the passengers' minds when they were traveling. In the disguise of Chinese artist, Chambers ventured his suggestions. May convert a whole province into a garden, where the spectator, instead of toiling on foot as usual to see a few nothings and performing more revolutions than a horse in a mill, may wander over a whole country at his ease, in ships or barges, in carriages or on horseback, feasting the sight with scenes of the boldest dimensions, and contemplating the luxuriant varied productions of nature, improved and nobly enriched by art. In Chambers' vision, the rows, with various arrangements combined with constructions of new or uncommon objects, can produce all different kinds of effect, of greatness, of surprise, and of fear, becoming an instrument of engineering balanced nervous activities. Here are some images, not by Chambers himself, but his this is an image by Ledoux, who studied with Chambers together in France. I think this image explains what Chambers described, how roads are constructed to evoke reverential appreciation of what Burke would call the Creator's almighty arm. I'll just quickly go through this. In some places, these roads are carried by lofty vaulted passages through the rocks and the mountains, or upon causeways and bridges, over lakes, torrents, and arms of the sea, and in others they are supported between the precipices upon chains of iron, or upon pillars and many tiled arches over villages, pagodas, and cities. And again, this is an image by Zhang Song, Chambers' student in the Royal Academy. Yeah, and another example, again, is by Zhang Song. So here I come to the conclusion. Designed to be a garden where nature appears predominant, the city not only came to act as a kind of displacement of religious authority in the Asian regime, whereby the constraining moral effects of the latter were translated into the context of the urban life, but also the city became the site of reconciliation of human well-being, associated with both spirituality and general utility. The site contributing to social harmony and maintaining religious sentiment. Chambers' sensational urbanism gave us a powerful and a highly significant example of how the Birkin sublime, within frameworks of spirituality and well-being, shaped discourses on city and landscape planning in the 18th century. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I think we're going to skip the questions at this stage and go on for our three speakers, and then we'll have questions and comments at the end. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Where is he? Yeah, here we go. Okay. Upendra Sapoda, originally from Nepal, is an architect from Nepal, and is now a planner practicing in Kearney, New Jersey. He attended the university in Nepal and Ball State University here in the United States. And his presentation is entitled Culture, Spirituality in the Public Realm, What Can We Learn from the Past?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tom, Nadir, and everyone for the opportunity. Today I'll be talking about how culture, spirituality, and public realm shape the traditional Kathmandu and what we can learn from the past in this rapidly globalizing and urbanizing world. And this picture kind of gives a little insight what I actually going to talk about. You can see that a lot of people gathering. It's a chariot festivals happening there. And this is a religious festival, yet it's a very cultural, and you can see how people contested every single inch of the public space. Before I talk about Kathmandu, I'd like to discuss what actually happening today in the realm of city planning and design in general. City planning today is so much dominated by the economic concerns, and result of which citizens are being treated as more like a consumer, and the city and built environment as more like a market base. And you can see this has established a homogenization of urban space and architecture style, urban crises such as homelessness and urban plume and slums in most of the developing countries, decline of public realm, of course, and a lot of critics also include Jane Jacobs, Norman Cromwell, Leonard Sandercock. They all critics about the globalization and the more homogenization of the urban form and architecture style. We are seeing increasing homogenization of urban form and architectural style, which is posing a great threat to indigenous culture and uniqueness of a built environment. If you look at the top two images, for a layman, it will take some time to identify those two images. If you look at the bottom two, that's New York and that's Hong Kong. And if you look at the bottom two, anybody will probably able to distinguish those two urban forms. Another problem we are seeing is how homelessness problem in developed countries, most developed countries, and increase of informal settlements in developing countries. Economic dominated approach has made social cultural function as a peripheral concern, and rising real estate costs displace low income residents and indigenous businesses, which eventually may destroy authenticity of communities and traditional and cultures, place of traditional and cultural importance. Now I like to jump in Nepal. It's a sandwich between two booming economies, India and China, and the two rapidly urbanizing, powerful economy. And Nepal is also getting the influence from both these neighbors and rapidly urbanizing. Kathmandu Valley, particularly what I'm going to talk about, it remained intact up until 1950s, and rapid urbanization started taking place after 1980s and after 1990s with the political changes, and it started that marked also era of the liberalization and privatization and free market policy. It started growing rapidly again. And now it is estimated that Kathmandu has 2.5 million population. And during 1950, it was little less than 500,000. And as you can see now, tall concrete structure, high-rises structure are coming up, contesting traditional natural landscape and historical landscape as well. Kathmandu is, at this time, Kathmandu is witnessing a decline of traditional industries like traditional agriculture industries and handicraft industries, and emergence of new industries such as, brick factories, carpet factories, and you can see the influence of the globalization. Now people are lining up in the street. Newly KFC just opened, opened KFC restaurant, and you can see all the youngsters lining up to have a taste of chicken. Many historic and public places, such as this is called Chowk and Bhal in traditional languages, local languages, which still houses religious importance places and cultural places, but they are slowly, being occupied by the newly developed parking lots. Parking lots are automobiles and bikes are being parked in the public open space, and that's the one serious daunting problem Kathmandu is facing today. Now I would want to talk about the history of Kathmandu in a brief. Kathmandu is believed to have been stably inhabited as early as 3rd century BC. Early settlement patterns were highly influenced by both Vedic Hindu principles and Buddhism also. Though the culture and religion alone are not only factors that influence the settlement pattern of the Kathmandu Valley, there are a lot of topographical concern, climatic factors also goes with that. However, religion remains very seminal all throughout the history of the Kathmandu Valley, and this is one of the stupa erected by the Indian emperor who, after fighting wars, he became a disciple of Buddha, and then he traveled around the Asian subcontinent to propagate the message of Buddhism. So different dynasties ruled Valley since 1800 BC. Kiratas were the early settlers, and not much known about them, and Lichibi in particular were very instrumental in introducing public infrastructures and sort of formalized town planning techniques. And then that sort of techniques continued after Lichibi by Mullahs. They also developed a lot of religious structure, high-rise temples, and so on. Going back to Lichibi, who were very instrumental, Lichibi king called Gunakam Deva was said to have planned the whole city in khadga, which is a holy sword pattern like this. And this is a map of somewhere around 1800 of Kathmandu. You can see the sort of that image is still maintained during 1800s, and sword pattern, and that sword pattern and the perimeter is secured by placing goddesses in every cardinal point, and it sort of created a territorial boundary, but but at the same time it a kind of boundary that limited the sprawl and keep the agricultural land outside the settlement limits. So this, the smart growth that we talk about, growth boundary we talk about today, probably was thoughtfully planned at that time already in Kathmandu Valley. And also Litchvis actually came from southern part of Nepal, from the India. They actually used the cosmic diagram, which we know as a mandala, mandala in city planning. And one of the towns in the Kathmandu Valley called Bisal Nagara, one of the prehistoric Lichvi town, was built on the mandala, which is 9 by 9 square plan. And in mandala and central part of the which they call the Brahma, the palace palace was planned at the center of the city. So cosmic image was extensively used in city planning in early Kathmandu. And that plan is same mandala pattern was also used in designing more formal public and religious spaces. You can see the courtyard right here. This is the religious courtyard, and if you can see this courtyard right at the center, there is some religious shrines or object of religious importance was placed. And the major feature of the traditional settlement of the Kathmandu Valley is the courtyard spaces formed by private buildings as well as religious and public structure. If you look at the figure ground here, it shows how different shape and sizes of courtyard are integrated within the settlement and how hierarchy are maintained depending on based on the neighborhood size and the religious significance. And normally these spaces courtyards are called bahal and chokes, which would house at least one religious shrines, and normally a chaitya of this kind, symbolizing spirituality and piety. And water body also used was an important component of the cultural part of the life, cultural life of that traditional Kathmandu. This is the oldest image of one of the bahals, as you can see, probably around 1800, and this is more recent development. So you can see right here, this is the main another religious structure, and that was right here. So basically everything is changed, but they still maintain this one, which is right here, and these shrines are still there. So even though a lot of things have changed, the core belief still is in place in Kathmandu Valley. Not only the public buildings, the private houses also equally play an instrumental role in guiding urban pattern and creating public realm at the neighborhood level. The overhanging roof that normally project out from the third floor roof level, while protect the decorated windows right here, also at the same time provide ample shading during the summertime and coverings, and also sort of create a psychological space. And this is from my personal experience. If you walk just along that direction, you sort of kind of propel to to the storefront right here, and it kind of creates an environment for continuous and rigorous communication amongst the public and the private citizens and the retailers and shopkeepers. So private houses also plays very important. If you look at this image, you can see the private houses. The courtyard is relatively smaller size, yet they will have some sort of religious stupas in mandalas from our place. So, and entries are from that side, so it's not from other side. So when you go inside the courtyard, you invariably see the neighbors, and you sort of create an environment for the informal environment for the interaction, and that sort of creates a unique social milieu in Kathmandu Valley. And there are a lot of rituals and festivals too, which actually celebrated in Kathmandu Valley. And this is one of the examples. This is called Akshaya Tritiya in Hinduism, and then locally they call Shiti Nakha, which is celebrated by cleaning community water body. As you can see, a person standing in front of water body, offering prayers, and other side. This is the pond right next to the temple, and community are gatherings and this just to clean up the everything over the time. So this is one of the interesting thing I always get fascinated about the culture and how that integrate in our social life and still is being practiced. So many cultural festivals that are celebrated are Kathmandu linked with both linked the spirituality and nature. Both in Buddhism and Hinduism, every kind of elements of nature are worshipped as a god, like Surya Deva as a sun god, Jal Devta as a water god, Ban Devta as a forest god, and so on. So emphasizing the importance of Mother Nature from religious and spiritual perspective. And so greening also is now today we are talking about greenings and green urbanism and so on. So greening was not a foreign idea in that context. Culture also emphasizes the importance of nature in totality. Informal city building guided practice based on religious and culture created a very unique form. And lastly, I think in the context of Kathmandu Valley, there are a lot to learn from the past. The concept of green urbanism, the growth management technique that was practiced well before 800 BC, cultural planning, strong public realm, religious principles, and how those things are integrated to form a unique form, and that is something that we need to learn from the past. And as a planner, we were really today focused on their planners and designers who are focusing on creating new thing and innovative thing. I think they also need to invest their expertise to create more humanized spaces and foster a strong social environment, sense of identity, sense of spirituality, at the same time providing impetus for a productive endogenous economy, which actually creates form strong social and public space. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Again, we'll wait till the third presenter here finishes, and then I'll open it up to questions and comments. It's my pleasure to introduce an old friend of mine from the Cairo School of Sacred Architecture, Steve Paget. And Steve is AIA lead AP and has been a faculty member at the University of Kansas since 1978. His research and teaching in architecture and Western civilization have resulted in many awards. His service has included, he's served on the board of ACSA, and Steve has degrees from the University of Kansas and the University of London. So it's going to take a minute for us to get his presentation up. So I thought maybe I'd do a little dance here. Is that all right? Okay, I'm going to show you the tie. Anybody know where this is?
Florence.
Put in the light.
Italy.
Italy. Yes.
Pizza and the Duomo.
Yeah.
Is that your own drawing?
No. No, but I've been there, though. There's two books I'd like to recommend by Edward Casey. One is called Remembering, and the other is called Imagination. And both books deal with two aspects of time. Remembering is the past, and imagination is the future. So, anyway, here we go. Steve.
Thanks, Phil. I'm going to read this very fast. Otherwise, I'll forget things. So indulge me here.
I forgot to give you the name, so would you read your title?
The title? Yes. Oh, because you didn't want to have to say paradisiacal. No, it is urban order as means to paradisiacal order. Eden, Jerusalem, and Linden. And if someone knows that I'm saying paradisiacal incorrectly, let me know, because I'm not actually sure. That's as close as I can get, I think. This paper explores the ways in which the cosmic order of creation was understood through the practice of sacred geometry for millennia, and was defined in the Western world as the elements and qualities of paradise: boundedness, centeredness, measuredness, and aspiring to connect heaven and earth by way of an axis mundi, a tree, mountain. This paper intends to demonstrate the ways in which the same paradisiacal ordering principles were used in Western urban centers for thousands of years, and even in the midst of the scientific revolution. This paradisiacal ordering was in the service of, in Merton's terms, meaning, order, truth, and salvation. In the Abrahamic tradition, God created the world. I'm not going to read the whole biblical text, but basically what you see here is a medieval version of God creating the world. He sets down his compass at a point, fixed point, then creates a circumference. And then the biblical text goes on to explain how he then creates duality. There is formed from unformed, there is inside from outside, there is water from earth, and so forth. By the late medieval age, God's depicted as the first geometer, as seen in this illustration. He fixes the center of the world with his compass and creates cosmos from chaos by the making of a boundary circle. This act establishes the fundamental dualities, inside, outside, formed, unformed, light, dark, etc. Many human cultures, in their attempts to make their places connected to the cosmic order, repeat this act as a foundational ritual. This paper, again, will describe examples of the use of this foundational ritual and its geometric elements and relationships. Again, from the biblical text, which I'm not going to read, Eden is created, a place for man. A garden. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river watering the garden flowed from Eden. From there it was separated into 4 headwaters. And it goes on to describe the names of those headwaters, of course. So here we have, again, the circle. It has an exterior perimeter, a circle, a fixed center from which there is a vertical, very important vertical, the tree, or trees, and that connection then being to the divine source for order. And we have then that within that circle a subdivision into 4 parts. This particular, where's my, oops, I have done the wrong thing. What have I, here, it was right here. I will now recreate order by, now what have I done? Oh, there we go. Okay, so, so the center, the perimeter, we know there's an inside and outside because man was cast out, right? So we know that. And we get the 4 waters coming from the center, but it also becomes depicted, of course, in this fashion. Eden includes a boundary wall inside order differentiated from outside undifferentiated space or chaos, is centered, is measured, divided by the source water that divides into 4 rivers, and contains an axis mundi at its center. Let's see, I'll have to jump ahead. Many traditions share elements of the Eden story in their creation myths, suggesting that it constitutes a cross-cultural archetype. Eliade identifies a similar set of characteristics for the establishment of a sacred or paradisiacal space in traditional cultures. We have a system of the world prevalent in traditional societies. A sacred place constitutes a break in the homogeneity of space. B, this break is symbolized by an opening by which passage from one cosmic region to another is made possible, from heaven to earth and vice versa, from earth to the underworld. C, communication to heaven is expressed by one or another of certain images, all of which refer to the axis mundi. pillar, ladder, mountain, tree, vine, etc. D. Around this cosmic axis lies the world, our world. Hence, the axis is located in the middle and the navel of the earth. It is the center of the world, end quote. It's arguable that one of mankind's traditional objectives has been to restore this archetypal order on earth, to reconstruct paradise, and thus to gain a harmonic relationship with the divine. Again, in many traditional culture, the making of a place starts with the driving of a stake in the ground, an axis mundi. This center point is used for the drawing of a boundary circle in the earth, thus establishing a sacred precinct. It's interesting to note that in some cultures, the staking out of the center is referred to as symbolically staking the snake, thus fixing the chaos of the world. Again, Iliada offers the following. This is from a ritual from India. The astrologer shows what spot in the foundation is exactly above the head of the snake that supports the world. The mason drives a peg into the ground at this spot in such a way as to peg the snake securely down. A foundation stone is placed above the peg. The cornerstone is thus situated exactly at the center of the world. But the act of foundation at the same time repeats the cosmogonic act, is it cosmogonic or cosmogonic? Gonic, okay. Act of Indra, who smote the serpent in his lair, end quote. According to Walter Burkert, the following describes the making of a sacred place in an early Greek sacrificial ritual. The participants go singing in procession to the place of sacrifice. The event itself takes place before an altar stone. The participants draw a circle around themselves in the earth. The area enclosed becomes a sacred precinct. I'll end the quote there. In these foundation rituals, fixity at a center and a boundary separating the sacred ordered space from the relatively undifferentiated chaos outside the boundary were established. This not only provided people with an ordered space, but connected them to the Creator by repeating a ritualized version of the original act of creation. For one nomadic people, the establishment of a sacred place was not accomplished by way of a permanent, geographically fixed center. Instead, a portable axis mundi was carried to serve to bring the influence of heavenly order to earth wherever the society wandered. And this is quoted from, it's Burkert's quote, but it's from Iliada. According to the traditions of a Narunta tribe, the Akilpa, from the trunk of a gum tree, the god fashioned the sacred pole, and after anointing it with blood, climbed it and disappeared into the sky. This pole represented a cosmic axis, for it is around the sacred pole that territory becomes habitable. During their wanderings, the Akilpa also carry it with them and choose the direction they are to take by the direction toward which it bends. This allows them, while being continually on the move, to also be in their world, and at the same time in communication with the sky into which the god vanished. For the pole to be broken denotes catastrophe. It is like the end of the world, reversion to chaos. It's reported that once, when the pole was broken, they wandered about aimlessly for a time and finally laid down on the ground together to wait for death to overtake them. End of quote. For the Akilpa, the erecting of this pole as an axis mundi constitutes a foundation ritual that includes the repeating of the god's climbing of the pole to heaven. This foundation ritual establishes for the Akilpa a new center of the world. Now for city order. Foundational placemaking can also be seen in ancient city forms. For instance, in ancient Mesopotamian cities, the boundary becomes the wall. The axis mundi is manifested by the ziggurat at the center, stepping to heaven, a stylized sacred mountain. And measurement, differentiation, is defined through the major roads that cut through the city, connecting the major portals, the way in and out. These roads also define the quarters of the city, a designation that persists linguistically to this day, French Quarter, Latin Quarter, etc. And we see a diagram for a city here, ancient Mesopotamian, in which the diagram is very clear. And of course, the actual city is not quite the same as the diagram. It's based upon it. It's interesting to compare the following, that image of a city and the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph for city to the organizational components of Eden, centered, bounded, and measured into quarters. This cross-cultural and transhistoric use of the same set of geometric relationships again suggests that it is a fundamental archetype, shared by human societies in their attempt to bring order to their place in the world. Jerusalem in the center of the world. Ancient Jerusalem, in fundamental relationships, if not in precision, also fulfills this basic paradisiacal model. The city is bounded by a wall. The wall contains portals through which major roads pass. These roads cut through the city, subdividing it into precincts. And at its center is the Temple Mount, the mountain upon which sat the Temple of Solomon, the physical and symbolic link between God and his people. While the city was never a perfect circle, the symbolic importance in the Judeo-Christian tradition of Jerusalem as the city of God was so strong that it was depicted for centuries as a perfect circle, thus fulfilling the paradisiacal cosmogram, emphasizing the importance of both the symbolic geometry and of Jerusalem as ideal forms that approach God's cosmic order, heaven on earth, or paradise. According to rabbinical tradition, the temple was founded on the foundation stone, itself the center of the world. Quote, "As the navel is set in the center of the human body, so is the land of Israel the navel of the world, situated in the center of the world, and Jerusalem in the center of the land of Israel, and the sanctuary in the center of Jerusalem, and the holy place in the center of the sanctuary, and the ark in the center of the holy place, and the foundation stone before the holy place, because from it the world was formed." Talmudic tradition also holds that the foundation stone is the site of sacrifices to God by Adam, Cain, Abel, Noah, and the place where Abraham brought Isaac to be sacrificed. Solomon later founds the temple on the foundation stone, placing the Holy of Holies with the Ark of the Covenant directly upon it. A circular cut in the stone penetrates to the cave below, known as the Well of Souls, thus adding another symbolic function of the stone as the navel of the world, or omphalos. The stone is also attributed to be the site from which Jacob ascended to heaven on his ladder, a form of axis mundi. In Muslim tradition, it is from the stone that the prophet is believed to have been taken on the night journey to pray with Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. When Jerusalem was taken by the Muslim army in the 7th century, the Dome of the Rock was constructed to properly protect and memorialize the stone and to create properly sanctified space around it. The structure is centered on the foundation stone. The center serves as the point from which the enclosed area is first differentiated into 4 parts and then 8. This octagonal symmetry in the horizontal plane supports the dome above, itself a representation of the dome of heaven. This dome is centered on the foundation stone below and connected to it by the invisible axis mundi. Roman city order. If Jerusalem was believed by the Abrahamic religions to be the center of the world, or a center of the world, founders of Roman settlements were no less interested in the religious significance of making a city. According to their religious rituals, a point was first established and a rut was then plowed into the ground, centered on the original point. This described the eventual city wall. From the center radiated the Cardo and Decumanus, the major roads oriented to the cardinal directions. At the center were then built the structures of military, civic, and religious authority. By the construction of these seats of authority, the Romans brought order to the new city and its surrounding countryside. Prior to these foundation rituals, the site and its surrounding region was believed to be without order, chaotic, barbaric, recalling Eliada's description of creating order or differentiation from undifferentiated chaos. From Rictvert, the noble templum, as Varro says, ought to have a continuous fence. This insistence, says Lotte, on a purifying enclosure of lands is in any case characteristic of Roman religious thought. But the town shared other characteristics with the temple, besides that of being ritually enclosed. The most important of these was the conrectio, the division into 4 parts. In Rickwert's quotes, and I just skipped one, there are several elements of the paradisiacal Edenic cosmogram at work. There's a continuous enclosure around a center. Within this enclosure, the area is divided into 4 parts, the conrectio, and the enclosure wall is defined by a rut made by a larger animal, an ox, on the outside, and a smaller animal, a cow, on the inside, thus approximating a circle. Traces of the original Roman city order can still be seen in cities such as Florence. London as the New Jerusalem. During the 17th century, Western society and the way it ordered cities went through many fundamental changes. Arguably, the most fundamental change was in the method as defined by Descartes, by which humans were to understand and operate within the world. But this budding scientific understanding did not quickly erase the traditional worldview that preceded it. In fact, many of the same scientists were actively engaged in what we would now consider pre-scientific pursuits. In England, Newton practiced alchemy, Boyle practiced sacred geometry, and Wren served as his lodge's master mason. Many of the founding members of the Royal Society belonged to an organization called the Kabbalah Club. They did not view this activity as mutually exclusive of science, but as a way of fusing the new and traditional worldviews. Nowhere can this be seen better than in the plans drawn up for the reconstruction of London following the Great Fire of 1666. Taking the opportunity to better establish London as the New Jerusalem, sources of order were sought that broke from the Roman Church's authority. Entries by Wren and Evelyn symbolically paid homage to the Kabbalistic tree of life. We'll see that more clearly in just a moment. Employing multiple centers of civic and religious authority connected by the major streets, creating a pattern, especially in Evelyn's proposal, not unlike the tree. And we can see the sephirots laid out roughly here in Evelyn's plan, with the red dot, the position, his proposed position of St. Paul's. Other proposals employed the new, perfectly rational Cartesian grid, which we see in Hooke's proposal. In the end, the politics of expediency and personal ownership of property, essentially, the politics of expediency dictated that very little of the pre-fire street pattern was changed. But Wren oriented the new St. Paul's, unlike the original St. Paul's, which was oriented directly to the east, on axis with the Templar, the Temple Church, beyond. This illustration shows this orientation on the lowest image. The center image is of the Temple Church plan, and the upper image, the plan of the Dome of the Rock. The Temple Church was built by the Knights Templar as one of many churches based on the order of the Dome of the Rock, which the Knights Templar referred to as Solomon's Temple, and also of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. With this orientation to the Temple Church, the new St. Paul's makes a strong symbolic connection to the original Abrahamic center of the world in its various forms. Jerusalem, Solomon's Temple, foundation stone, the Holy of Holies, the Well of Souls, the navel of the world. This symbolic connection was important to Wren and his contemporaries in order to establish London as the New Jerusalem, St. Paul's as the new Solomon's Temple, and the Stuart monarchy as the new Solomonic kingship. But not only had the Stuart monarchy been felled by Charles I's beheading, the original St. Paul's Tower had been felled by the Great Fire. It had served as London's Axis Mundi, as depicted in this 17th century image of London, the pre-fire image. For London to be established as the New Jerusalem, the new center of the world, then meant that a reestablishment of the monarchy was necessary and a new Axis Mundi needed to be established. Wren established this new Axis Mundi by using the Kabbalistic tree of life as his starting point. And it's a little dim here, but the same sephirots we saw in Evelyn's plan are set out here on 3 axes coming through. The same tree used by Evelyn in his proposal for the new plan of London, thought to be of Mosaic origins by Wren and his contemporaries. The Kabbalistic tree was the perfect device for establishing a symbolic connection to Jerusalem, Eden, and the original creation. And in summary, in the Genesis story, God created cosmos from chaos by establishing a center of boundary and measurement, the 4 rivers. At the center, he placed a paradisiacal garden, Eden, with an axis mundi, the tree. Once cast out from this perfect place, humankind was left to recreate as best they could the order of paradise. Humankind of various traditions has employed the archetypal forms described above in the establishment of sacred places and cities. In the Abrahamic traditions, the shared center of the earth has been Jerusalem and the foundation stone. In order to create a new center of the earth, Wren and his contemporaries used the same archetypal elements. The plans, especially by Wren and Evelyn, for the reconstruction of the city engaged in the symbolic recreation by establishing conditions of boundedness using the line of the old city wall, centeredness with an axis mundi, the tree, and measuredness, the archetypal forms of paradisiacal order. Thank you.
Do we have our 3 speakers come on here? Okay, do we have any questions or comments? Yes. Wait for Mike.
This is a big question. Starting with the idea of the Kathmandu Valley, which was once a lake. And the story is that the Buddha was on Swayambhu and predicted that Manjushri would come and cleave through the mountain so the lake would drain. And then geometry is imposed on landscape, assuming that landscape was without order and geometry gave order. And there was a certain point that the Bible was used and Plato used to give, I'm going to say, an excuse that geometry was the organizing principle that connected people with divinity. And you could say the same thing about the idea of the beautiful and the sublime. The beautiful was a suggestion of geometry, was perfection, and the sublime was an expression of nature, which was imperfection. And it leads to the question, is it possible for spirituality in terms of geometry and sustainability in terms of nature, can they coexist? That's a big one. I was going to ask how this all came to be, that geometry was used as the image of our connection with divinity, but then the question became something bigger.
Go ahead.
You want to draw straws or?
That's really interesting observation. Can geometry and spirituality are linked or not? In the context of Kathmandu, if you look at the city pattern, traditional city pattern, like I on my first slide where I sort of outlined that all those how they form the growth boundary. And the idea was, at that time, idea was not to, I think, idea was both to encourage the spirituality and religious belief that has a lot to do with the social coexistence. At the same time, also to foster and maintain the agricultural land, which is relatively irrigable, and access to which has the access to the irrigation in a larger city pattern. And if you look at the individual houses or monasteries, which is called Bahal, that also was planned in mandala patterns, like it's the 999 square mandala pattern, and at the center of the courtyard, you have some whether stupa or a statue of some sort of religious significance, and that also connects not only with spirituality. I think that one of my professors argued that it has also, because it's a earthquake-prone zone, and if you design a courtyard pattern and right at the middle, virtually you don't place any activities other than just symbolic structure. When earthquake happens, the center of gravity actually of the building sort of merge in that particular courtyard, creating no significant adversarial impact. So that was probably another reason. So there are multiple of reasons, not only the spirituality. I think there is a rational reason. There is it is linked with topography, local geometry, and of course the spirituality and religion played a vital role. So I think in today's world, if we look at the spirituality in more secular sense, we can still say that using a geometry, we can still form the spaces, those sort of spaces, and which will be sustainable, and that in that case, that will, I think, also connect to the spirituality, I guess.
Okay, can we have another question or comment? Julio.
The question is for you. So,
Yeah.
I think what you brought this conversation between enlightenment and romanticism, really, between liberty and politics, and then how that interface with romantic notions of, Burkean and sublime. And I think that conversation really is, to this day, is an essential conversation. Clearly, enlightenment, or at least from my viewpoint, won the day in terms of rationality and the urban and modernity, let's say. But we are left with this need to bring this other dimension, the spiritual, the romantic, the sense of the sublime, fear and beauty. So I wanted, if you could comment on some of your diagnostic of the situation today, based on your paper.
I'm not sure if I fully understand your question. Can you please make it more precise?
Since Enlightenment until today, basically Enlightenment took over the old tradition of spirituality by rationalizing the world, basically, in some way. And you could say that for the political system that we have today, democracy, liberty, and so on, are in some way the daughters of this revolution. Romanticism was a reaction, actually, against Enlightenment. So I was trying to think how the conversation between Enlightenment and Romanticism, which I think you posed, as far as I can tell, how you see that happening today.
Right, thanks. Yeah, that's a very thoughtful comment. Yes, well, Chambers' dissertation has been considered as a precursor of Romanticism imagination. It was written in the late 18th century, whereas normally we would think, Romanticism is 19th century, early mid-19th century, like Wordsworth, like Coleridge. So Chambers was really writing in advance to that era. But I think perhaps more important is in Chambers, it shows quite typically there's not such a opposition, a antithesis between Romanticism and New Classicism, or what we call normally we would link to Enlightenment. Chambers himself, is conventionally is considered as a orthodox classical theorist, and as well as his design, like a Summerest house. So this piece of work, because of his, his almost whimsical imagination, was often, criticized or like mocked as his flee into some romantic imagination. So I guess what I want to say here, it's not an antithesis, it's either classicism, either Enlightenment or Romanticism. Rather, they are, they coexist in figures such as William Chambers and many of his contemporary architects. When we talk about Enlightenment, I think we tend to link Enlightenment to this, rational discourse, emphasis on reason, on pure reason, whereas we tend to ignore, in many 18th century figures themselves, rational reason is not incompatible at all with imagination. In other words, imagination itself, it can be the expression of the soul, the movement of the soul. It has, for them, they have all different kinds of explanations, that reason is not something existing independently or in a dominant position in the brain. Rather, it is imagination itself. It's a fluid imagination. It's identified with the nervous, the physiological system, as was expressed by many, like William Cullen, the famous Edinburgh School physician at the time, and whose writing definitely had impact on all these, these sensationalist, so to speak, architects such as William Chambers, for example. And I think for us today, perhaps there is not, I would say it's not just the order of geometry linking to the previous question. I think for them, perhaps order came to be identified with human emotions, with the principle of sensations, rather than just the formal aesthetic. It's irregular or it's regular, it's geometry or it's something else. I think this is, from my own experience, this is a very interesting and perhaps even inspirational source for our practice today. When you move your focus to human feelings, how our design of the external environment can correspond to our emotions, through which we cultivate our spirituality and well-being. Perhaps that's something I find interesting and useful.
We've got time for one quick question, or a quick question and answer. Are you good? Okay. It's almost 10 o'clock, so well, you're supposed to start now, Okay.
It could be a segue.
Yeah, this is a segue. So.
Before we start the other session, I want to compliment all three presenters And I'm sorry that you took Steve from my session because it was good. I just want to comment to Steve and enhance maybe the whole idea of the core and 4 elements around it as a central kind of urbanism. Because Jerusalem as a city evolved into 4 quarters from this one area of the temple. We have the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. And until today, these are the foundation of the city, and this is how the old city, and this is how the old city still operates. And each of them have their own characteristics, their own holy places, and their own markets and bazaars.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.